Hello to you all, and welcome to me answering my jury questions from my e-portfolio. I'm sorry I couldn't meet you all in person, but this will do for now. So Mr. Gatso, thank you for your 2 questions. I'll start with yours. I'm sorry we couldn't meet in person, but a video will do. Your first questions, you stated, you wrote that teaching cannot be done without including ICTs in the class, and that not including ICTs is not relating to your students, and that ICTs is a crucial part of the teaching profession nowadays. Your question was, how would you react if you were giving a teaching position in a small country school without ICTs? To begin, in the past, in my practicum 3, I was abroad. I was in Belgium with another of my colleagues, where there was absolutely no technologies whatsoever in the class. We had to use blackboard and chalk, and that was pretty much it. So I've gotten kind of used to it a little bit, and we've developed some tools that we could at least include some ICTs in the class. We used the ICTs that we had with us, so it was mostly cell phones and things like that. So we plugged the cell phone with the speaker, and we got the students to listen to some music, some sounds, animal sounds, music that was either Canadian or Anglophone, to really immerse culture more into the classroom. As we know, this is an important part of teaching too, so combining the two of them. Another thing that we can do to include ICTs in the classroom is actually planning using ICTs, so including cultures and things like that. When we are preparing our planning, it's not as much as including or using the actual tools in class, but it's a good way for us to get to see different activities or things that are going on the web, and that we can bring back to our students. Another thing that I find that we can do as teachers is get the students to use their technological tools, maybe less in primary than in secondary, but in secondary schools most students already have a phone or an iPad or things like this, so really get them to bring them in class and include them as much as possible. I know not all students will have that technology, but it's a great way to do team activities where a number of students pair up with the students who have brought their technology within the classroom. So this is another good and fun way. Another way I found of including ICTs into my teaching that is not necessarily in the school is actually giving homework that is done on the computer or things like this. Nowadays students have email addresses that are related to the school, so you can share links on activities that they can do on the web, homework that they can fill out. I would give it not necessarily obligatory for the ones who don't have the opportunity to have technological tools at home, but at least for those who can, they can try out different English activities at home, and then they get to see ICTs a bit this way. Another thing we can do, I know you said that it's a small country school with no ICTs, but most of the time, even if there are not any technological tools in the classroom, there are some in the school. So actually finding ways to use the computer lab or the iPad lab, or they all have a different system of the tools that nowadays are all available. Most of the time now it's Chromebooks that you can bring in the class. So really try to incorporate them in your planning at least a few times a year so the students can move around with it. It's not necessarily the best we can do with the ICTs, but when the resources are less, this is what we can use. Now, for your second question, you said about my analysis of competency 10. Other than learning more about our students and what their needs are, what other important aspects of cooperation with the staff within a school are there? Well, there are many, but to name a few, I found that one of the most important ones is actually modeling cooperation to the students. When you work well with the teaching staff or other members of the teaching community that are janitors, secretaries, principals, anything, you really show the students how to cooperate and work within a community. So I feel that that's a really good way to promote actually cooperation and working together in the community. That is important for students since it is one of their broad areas of learning, if I'm not mistaken, being part of a citizenship. So that's a really nice point. And then they are also the possibilities of having multiple projects and the interdisciplinary projects and working with other teachers to create fun projects for students that they can have in different subjects and incorporate together, that the school can see and that they feel that they are more a part of it. There are also positive school environments if the teachers work well together, as I've seen in my last practicum, where the teachers were super close and really tied together. The school community was super great. The atmosphere was pleasant. The students enjoyed it. They knew what to expect. They really enjoyed talking to each and every one of the teachers. The teachers, we could see that they really cooperated and helped each other. That brings me to my next point, that is really helping one another. As teachers, when we cooperate and when we work together, we can actually help each other a lot, whether it's sharing documents or a project that you've done in the past that can help a teacher out if they're looking for something specific for their class, or just lending a hand. I don't know about this group, this thing is going, really someone to bounce your idea off on, and that actually understands the system in which we're in, so this can really help. And as I've seen in my first two practicums, I would say not the first one because it was observation, but practicum 2 and 3, where we were in dyad, I really learned a lot from my dyad partner, Amélie. She really helped me and showed me different things that I had not necessarily noticed in my planning or in my classroom, things that happened, and I could really lean on her and she could lean on me. So it was really nice, a good environment, because we learn a lot from our supervisors and associate teachers, but we learn also a lot from our colleagues that were on the same level and that really understand the same situations we're going through. And also it's really good for having more creativity or having good projects that are actually fun for students, like in our classes did the 312 or 313, we had to create great activities for our students, either stations for IESL or activities that we can do about Halloween, and activities that carried on for many classes. And working with other teachers or other students in this case, you really get to explore more and learn about these things in a different way and see someone's other perception of the subject. So thank you a lot for your questions. Now moving on to Chantal's Pocket Burns questions. So thank you for sending your questions. I will begin by reading your question and then answering it. You said, in your C7 analysis, you stressed the importance of being equitable rather than being equal with all students. Give specific examples of how you have been able to do so and explain if these were adaptations or modifications and the difference between both. I find that being equitable is more important than being equal to all students. There are various elements that can happen while you're teaching, or you always have different students, so you have to adapt your teaching to them. An example is I had a new student come from abroad, from another country, and she really had difficulty understanding and being able to read the text, but she was a great listener. So for one of her evaluations, instead of giving it in written form, I gave the questions orally and she answered orally the questions. So this really helped her get a better grade, but I had to be considerate for the other students that I would not be checking spelling, because in her case, she did not have to spell. I wrote it down for her, so in that case I feel it's only fair for them that I do not evaluate it, but still I differentiated for her. Then there were two groups where I was reading a story, and one of the groups I brought to the back of the class where they could sit down in a circle and really see the book from a closer perspective and have a better look at the images. For the other class, I decided to let them stay at their desks calmly, and I moved around the classroom to show the pictures, because there is an autistic student in that classroom and moving around for him is a lot and he tends to react. So therefore I chose to let the students there and modify the planning I had originally done to make sure that the student was comfortable being where he was and that he could participate in the activity without too much stimulus. Then another thing I did was I prepared a great activity for two of my grade 4 groups. A lot of interactive activities, a lot of moving around, two separate sides of the class. And for one group in particular, I decided not to do it and change the activities, because there are a lot of behavioral issues with that group, and I felt that class management would be impossible with that group. Therefore, I chose to do a different activity where they were all at their desk and sometimes in teams of 2, but they still had the same pedagogical goals, but the activity was in fact different. So when it comes to defining the difference between adaptation and modification, I feel like for me personally, it might vary from one person to another. When I say adaptation, is that the planning stays mostly the same, but there are only little tweaks to change to adapt to either a specific group or a specific student. And the goals stay the same. The activity in general, from a global standpoint, stays the same, but some part of it vary. There is no difference with what is being evaluated, as we've seen in differentiation is not doing a different evaluation, is just modifying it. When it comes to really modification of a planning, it's when the criteria can stay the same, they can vary, but the activity is globally not the same. Like for my last example with my group with behavioral issues, that I did a completely different activity. For me, this is modifying and not adapting your planning, because it is more than just tweaks and little details. Overall, the class change and the planning of the class change. So this is how I differentiate adapting something that's already created and planned, just adding some little tweaks, and modifying, whereas changing a lot of different elements to make it fit with the situation in particular. Now, for your second question, you mentioned you provide a very complete analysis of C8 and how you have used technologies in your classroom. Can you elaborate on the limitations teachers can encounter while using ICTs? What ways can be used to overcome these obstacles? Well, as you know, I've struggled a little bit with C8, but I've really improved, so I know some of the problems that teachers can encounter, especially with ICTs. ICTs do not always work. You always have to be ready with a plan B. It does not mean that since you've prepared to use something that's on the web that it will work. Sometimes internet crashes, sometimes there are bugs with the ICT in itself. There can be problems. The web page that you're trying to access is no longer available. The internet is not working, the page is not loading, the game is not working out as it's supposed to. There are various things that can go wrong from that standpoint. What I did and what I'm still trying to do is find tools that can be downloaded to the school computer or that can be used without the use of internet, because most of the time once the program or the tool you're using is already on your computer, you really reduce the amount of times it can break or not work, and it's really focused on just if the smart board breaks down or your classroom computer breaks. And that's a different thing that can happen, but it's really less likely to happen than the internet not working or working really slowly that day. So I feel that that's a good way to really plan for these situations, and when you can do it, then why not? Another thing I've seen is that most of the time some problems with the ICTs is that we're not necessarily trained to use them properly. I've been working a lot in my practicums with my associate teachers to work on this. Been attending some trainings of the CSBE, Commission Scolaire Bourque de Chemin, and I've seen a lot of things. I've actually decided to take an optional course with ING 270, which is digital technology, so we saw other tools that could be used in the class. But most of the time, as student teachers and as teachers, we're not necessarily trained enough to use those tools when we get into the classroom, and they tend to vary from one school to another, on one school board to another. So you really have to be prepared, and sometimes you cannot because you don't know the technology. To overcome these things, the thing I found that students really enjoy too is admitting that you don't know and actually asking for the students' help. The students are used to being in that environment. They've been there for months, sometimes years. They know how it works and they're really good with it. So most of the time I tend to turn to students and actually ask for them to solve my problems. and often they really enjoy to do so, and they prefer it than me just running around in the classroom for 2-3 minutes trying to figure out how it works. I tend to pick a student or ask them if there are any volunteers and let them play with the ICTs and help me with my problems. So this I found was a really good tool. And with ICTs, I mean, you never know what could happen, so always have plan Bs prepared for whenever you decide to use them in class. So thank you, Chantal, for your questions. And now for Corinne's questions. I don't know if I will have time to answer them all, but I will at least answer one so we can have a look at it. Corinne mentioned as a first question, in your first conception of teaching, you mentioned that teaching is about using humor and being able to laugh at your own mistakes. However, you did not mention anything about it in your subsequent conception of teaching analysis. How is using humor and being able to laugh at your own mistakes still actual, and what impacts does it have on the students? Honestly, I think it's always up to date, and we should always use humor in the class. This is the most fun way I found to laugh at my own mistakes. Teaching is a serious job, but it should not be taken seriously. Making mistakes is okay, and I find that being able to laugh at your mistakes reduces the stress in the environment, showing the students that you too make mistakes and that it's okay, and we can laugh about it and move on, and actually show them that they know English, because most of the time it's them that correct you. So they really get to see, oh, I know this, she made a mistake, so therefore it reduces the stress in the environment. And actually I find that it promotes risk-taking, which is super important, as we've seen in many classes at university, whether it's planning or actually learning about competency 1 and really developing that knowledge of competency 1, where we learn that most of the time why students don't speak is because they are shy and they don't want to take risks and being laughed at. This was one of the focus of my INT 401 research, that was actually using games to promote speaking orally in English. And I found that playing games or laughing or just enjoying yourself in class is really a good way for students to take risk, because it's not so stressful and not so strict as an environment, so they can really enjoy themselves and just relax. So this is something I found that is still super important. Now I have the time for one last little question, and Corinne, you still ask, is there a competency that you find difficult to work on and to improve, and what have you been doing to cover for that? Well, as I've mentioned a little bit before, I really had difficulty with C8 because I had not seen it a lot in my practicums and I did not use it frequently. So I got training, I got help from fellow students, I got help from my associate teachers. I took an optional course that was focused on technology to really get the help I needed that concerned this. And then I found that getting help from students and everything, I really improved my C8 and really covered the slack I was taking, I would say, to say in that way. And now I feel that the competency I want to work on most is C7, is differentiation, getting to know all your students' intervention plans and being able to adapt your differentiation to all your students that need it is actually something I'm working on, and that right now is really time consuming and should not be that much. So I will try to focus on that more in the future and improve and get quicker at finding solutions and adapting and finding just little tweaks that really work for the students. So this is overall what I would say for that question, because we're running out of time and I really want to take a minute to say thank you to you all for answering the questions. I've really learned a lot in the past 4 years at the Bills, and I'm really glad it's ending, but at the same time really sad, because I've really enjoyed my 4 years here, and I feel that even your questions are helping me reflect more and become better teachers. So thank you for all your input, and I really hope to get comments from you, and stay safe in this situation, and please stay home. Thank you.